everyone, my name is Yuliia and you are watching New Multicultural Community Hour. In this segment, we are talking about civic issues in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Today, we are talking about the future of Manitoba's cultural communities and the importance of empowering their voices to make Manitoba a welcoming and inclusive province. For this special episode, I invited Martin Itzkow. He is an executive director of the Coalition of Manitoba Cultural Communities for Families and Kathleen Vyrauen. She is a project manager of the Ethnocultural Council of Manitoba. Hello, Martin. Hello, Kathleen. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Yes, our pleasure.
Keep watching the interview until the end to find out what the current roles and future ones of cultural communities are, their strengths and expectations. So, Martin, Kathleen, tell us what made you to collaborate together.
I think the intention was at least from the Coalition of Manitoba Cultural Communities for Families, our frame of reference is we don't do things by ourselves. We're always doing collaborations with people and organizations. And Kathleen's with an organization that we value tremendously, the Ethnocultural Council of Manitoba. And our belief is that there are more things we can do together to actually expand our impact in community rather than just doing it by ourselves. So that's really why we're doing this together today. That's my thinking.
Kathleen, tell us what Ethnocultural Council of Manitoba do and what are some of your projects?
So the council started actually just as a way to bring community together. It was started to plan what's called the Stronger Together Dinner. And it was an opportunity for different ethnocultural communities to come and celebrate over food, dance, music for an evening, build connections and networks with both settlement organizations as well as other community members and feel like if they're being welcomed here in their new environment. And then over the years, because the council was working with I think currently right now we work with over 40 different ethnocultural community groups and organizations. They started to take on projects based off of what those communities were needing in terms of, barriers that they're facing in their settlement journeys and integration. And they work together because, when we work with our governments, we know that strength in numbers is always extremely important. So ECCM started just as this dinner and then formed into its own organization and has been able to really have the outreach that's needed to talk to so many different community members. So then when Martin, we saw that there was lots of cross collaboration between what CMCCF was doing and the people that they were talking to and then what ECCM was doing. So we thought it's actually quite natural for us to work together and bring those partners just to the same table.
Absolutely.
Kathleen, your organization has launched many programs for a change on common social, economic, and political challenges faced by ethnocultural communities. Tell us more about one of those that you feel has made the most difference in bringing communities together and for their well-being.
So right now we're doing a project called Healthy, Safe, and Violence-Free Relationships, and that came out actually from listening to what communities were saying during the COVID-19 pandemic. More people were at home, there was more exposure to things like intimate partner violence, so community members were starting to voice their concerns around being stuck at home in sometimes very precarious situations. So ECCM applied for federal funding to be able to launch both a research project as well as look at doing resource distribution for ethnocultural communities. So we were able to have 30 different conversations with both ethnocultural communities here in Winnipeg and also outside in small centers. So we talked to communities in Portage la Prairie, Brandon, and Nipawa, and we're able to see what are those differences and the needs of those communities both in small centers and here in the city, and then what resources are available to them, and if there's any gaps that those community members are facing, how can we as a council support that, whether that be go to the government and say we need to develop these resources, which takes money, or we need to empower those community organizations that are already doing that work and build those connections to those ethnocultural communities so that they can access those resources. So we are in our final year of that project. We're going to look to launch, our final product, whatever that may be. But we were able to have some really great conversations and build really good connections to our community members. So much so that they've come back and asked us to continue that project, to do more. They want more resources. They want more conversations to be able to voice what's going on. And for us, that's exactly what ECCM wants. So, yeah.
Martin, my next question is to you. Canada is a leader in welcoming new immigrants. I know that you bring some statistics. Can you please share with us and what Canada should do to stay on the leading edge in welcoming new immigrants and for our well-being?
Probably the best way to frame it, provide the lens based on what Kathleen was talking about in terms of working within communities, there is a real belief by many people that cultural communities are invisible within the Canadian sphere, which is a real problem because 23% of Canadians are immigrants. That's the largest number of the G7 countries in the world. We have the largest percentage of the 6 largest countries in the world, which is really surprising. If you ask a Canadian, how does the cultural community fit within their context? Who are they? What do they do in Canada? That's a really important thing. In Manitoba, 20% of Manitobans are immigrants. That's a significantly large number. And you take that and start looking at which communities are we talking about. And we had a conversation with a community yesterday that believes they're completely invisible. People don't know them, don't understand them, and the real concern is that they're facing racism, hatred, and discrimination. However, on the positive side, and the work that we're going to be doing over the next year is focusing on what is the purpose and what's the value of cultural communities in the context of Canada going forward. So the statistics point to us in a way that says very large populations. Canada's going to be admitting about another 400,000 over the next couple of years. 400,000 more people from different cultural communities. What does that mean to Canada? Why is that important? That's our question.
What actions and decisions must be taken to make all voices of our communities are heard?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. But I think Kathleen's doing a part of it. And this is an intersection of 2 organizations. What Kathleen described in terms of her process is incredibly important. It's hearing the voices of community around safety, very much about how to deal with conflict and whatever the resources that are required. Communities need a lot of resources. From our point of view, what I think is really important in that kind of context is we're a bridging organization. Our focus is bringing communities, service providers, and governments and policymakers together to find out how we can actually collaborate and how the voices can be heard both in terms of services that are required, mechanisms of service delivery, co-creation, but also governments and policy. And to date, I would have to say we've had some success in working with some levels of government, but not all, and not all departments of government. And I can go pretty negative in terms of our experiences over the last basically 15 to 17 years of this work. But we really believe acting as a bridge to bring those 3 domains together is going to be really important because it's not just what communities are demanding in terms of services and be treated fairly, but also the fact is that communities want to also be able to determine their own futures and decide what's important for them. The challenge we have is we talk more about well-being in community, well-being. Who's defining that language? Who's defining what that means? Communities have to speak up on what is well-being. That's one of our pieces of work as well.
Kathleen, your organization is working with large and small, new and well-established community groups. What do you find the most challenging in civic engagement and creating an inclusive and welcoming city and province?
So I think for us specifically, mobilizing community can be quite difficult. You know, community members wear so many different hats. We have, yes, you have settlement organizations, but I think that the way that sometimes those settlement organizations are funded, specifically to what Martin is speaking about, oftentimes they work in silos. So the way that funding models are from our governments are you are only allowed to provide services to that one service. So whether it be employment or it be healthcare or whatever it may be. But we know that the way that community works is when they seek out services, they build a connection with that staff or that agency because maybe it's close to home, maybe it's somebody that they recognize from their community, they feel that connection, and they want wraparound services, but that's not funded that way. So for community to be able, and then if they won't go to, XYZ or organization to get 4 different services from 4 different settlement organizations. They'll only want to go to that one. So that's when we have community members that fall through the cracks. So right now, we end up having community members that will supplement, or community leaders that will supplement that work. So they'll take it on even though it's not within their role or it's not within their 9-to-5 job or whatever it may be. They'll say, okay, on my own time, I'm going to go and provide that support to that community member. I'm going to pick them up from the airport. I'm going to drive them to every single appointment they need. But yet they're also still trying to complete their own settlement journey. They're trying to provide for their own families. They're trying to get their education and their credentials recognized, So they're trying to do their own things for their own journey, but they're also trying to support their community. And at that, we end up getting major burnout from community members. People also will not stay in the city. They'll move to other provinces because they hear things about opportunities that are outside of there. ECCM right now is working, we often work with, municipal governments to talk about things like making Winnipeg a more welcoming and inclusive city, and what does that mean. And we have right now, we work with Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, which I also work for, and they have a newcomer welcome and inclusion policy that they pushed really hard to get passed by our municipal government. But then in this budget that came through, there's no money allocated to it. So we can work really hard to, create programs, to create policies and all of that. But if they're not funded or if they're not endorsed by all levels of government or, settlement organizations, if they're underfunded and they don't have the staff to provide that program that's a necessity, they're going to fail. And then that is a detriment to the communities, right? So I think for us, we really talk about those wraparound supports and those having to have everybody at the table. Everyone needs to sort of buy into what it is that we're talking about when it comes to policies, when it comes to program, and when it comes to funding. It has to be able to be sustainable and long-term. So I think for us, yes, getting community to the table can be difficult, but once they're there, they're passionate. But we want to make sure that it's worth their time and their effort, and knowing that, they may be, for them to come and sit with you and talk with you, it's taking away from them being able to go to their job or provide for their family or something like that. So it has to be worth their time. So I think we look at it from all of those aspects and all of those areas and make sure that everybody is actively involved, but also having the best sort of outcome from what it is that we're asking them to do.
And we go further. I just want to add to that as well,
Sure.
because we have a project as well, very similar, but it's a different kind of twist on it. It's really looking at cultural communities and their relationship with service providers, not just immigrant settlement service providers. And our experience has been that many agencies, and there are hundreds of nonprofits in Manitoba, and that's really important to know, and they provide amazing service. The question that's come back to us from many of those groups are, we don't know community, we don't understand the cultural communities, we don't have access to them, we believe our services are valuable and they need to be provided, but we don't know how to engage. And part of our conversation with them has been, if there's a place of strength in the relationship, where do you want to go with that? Cultural community, where do you want to go with that? Which services are important to you? Which services do you not know anything about? We have found out over the years that many people don't know what resources exist out there, generally speaking. Outside of immigrant settlement agencies, which I would say a large percentage of immigrants/refugees will have a connection to, maybe even short term, maybe not long term. And there may be many people as immigrants who have no connection to those services, period, because a lot of them come through the economic side of it and they don't necessarily see the need for it. But basically bringing those two bodies together, communities and service providers, to understand what they both need from each other, may end up with a more of a co-created model, as opposed to, we will deliver services to you, here's what they are, this is what our funders basically give us, take it or leave it. That's a real problem. Now, I think what's exciting about it is that service providers want to have these conversations, but they just don't know how to go about doing that. And they don't know necessarily what to do about it. But what's interesting, we had an engagement with communities maybe a month ago And our question was, what service providers are important to you? And even though they've been here for many years, the bottom line is it's still going to be immigration settlement. That still is a concern. And it's possibly because many of them have felt they weren't treated properly, that they actually were failed by the system in terms of being able to help in many ways. Others saw it in a more positive light. But the third part of that model is, where's the policy conversations? And the strongest pushback that we had from communities, it's about racism, hatred, and discrimination. That's the underpinning of how they feel that they're not being served, which is interesting.
CMCCF is constantly implementing new ways of engaging society, getting them more services. You're using new technologies, new strategies, which is effective in 21st century. What are your future plans and future programs to give new immigrants and new cultural communities more services?
We're not the organization that focuses on services. I mean, very much so. We're focusing on systems changes in many different places. I think Kathleen's explained in terms of their work, and there are other organizations that do similar work, are focusing on how to fix the problems now, how to deal with them in terms of what services should be existing, how they should be configured. Ours is very much about what's the role of cultural communities, and what are the services, and what are the supports that cultural communities need in order for the cultural communities to basically be able to self-determine their own future. But what's more important, our focus is, what do cultural communities offer to Canadians long-term? What's the value of a cultural community in terms of our democracy and democratic principles and practices? What about in terms of looking at what the resources are that should be existing that actually break through the issue of being unfair and treating people badly? That's our focus. So for the next year, and with Kathleen being a partner in this, her organization and others, we're looking at actually moving forward. This year is focusing what's the future of cultural communities in Manitoba. And we're still working out what the conversations will be, what the panels will be, the processes, but we're already starting to investigate in terms of where's the younger generations in this conversation? Because this is intergenerational. And we're talking about leadership, we're talking about identity, we're talking about where conflict exists within community. So there are many areas we're focusing on. So stay tuned. Over the next 5 or 6 months, we'll have more information about everything that we're doing. But clearly, come to our website, and through our other partners, people will start to see exactly what our path is going to be. But ultimately, the lens itself is going to be what's the future of cultural communities in the Manitoba context.
Kathleen, let's compare the period 10 years ago and now. Where do you see, and what changes do you see in terms of engagement of cultural communities, and where do you want to see it in the near future?
Well, I think that honestly, given this new census data, and I know Martin just talked about it, where I think it's 1 in 4 Canadians, 1 in every 4 Canadian would be an immigrant. So I think for us, we have to sort of look at what does that mean for, economics, what does that mean for safety in our communities, and what does that mean for education? So I think we have to look at it, from that sense. And 10 years ago, conversations that were happening 10 years ago, I think there was maybe a hope that they would have been resolved by now. And I think that for us is something that we really push, is that conversations 10 years ago cannot continue today. If there's an issue with something in education or a resource or something, it cannot take 10 years to resolve. So I think for us right now, if we're seeing an issue that is being raised in a cultural community or in a community as a whole, we want to address it now, and we want to address it and create future plans so that that does not continue on. And I think that's how ECCM is really trying to operate right now. And we can only do, and again, we can't do that in silos. So for us right now, it's really working specifically with government structures to push the necessity of doing things in a timely manner and ensuring that when we are addressing issues with cultural communities, that this is the face of what Canada is right now. It is the face of our city, is multiculturalism. It is, a diverse amount of people that are here with different lived experiences, with different skill sets, and with different cultures. And we have to respect that, and we have to empower those people to feel like they are contributing to our city or to our province or to our country. So for us, but again, if you're going to have to, if that means that there's a change that's like necessary for that to happen, it can't take 10 years to pass through government as a policy, to get funding for it. Like, it can't take that long, because people's settlement journeys, you know, they can be quite long, but also they'll make a decision about whether or not they're going to stay in the city or they're going to leave and go somewhere else within those first couple of months, sometimes within the first 3 years. So, you know, if we want people to really build roots in our city, and if we want them to be able to make this their home, we have to be able to provide them with the supports that they need to build those foundations again. So I think for us, yeah, it's really just working together, and it's getting all those systems and all those levels on board to see that necessity and to do it in a very timely manner. So.
But it's important to know, based on exactly what Kathleen said, and based on our experience and knowledge of what's happening in other countries, there's a tremendous amount of fear in systems about change. We know that change is there all the time. It's having an impact. But there are many people in many systems that are afraid to make change and see this as a threat. We know that. And we've seen that in terms of other countries, and we're having conversations with other places in the world who've actually been going through this process as well. And we're talking about partnerships with them in terms of bringing some of their skills and knowledge and experience back to Manitoba specifically. But we know when you start looking at systems, and I've worked in systems for years as well, they have a certain culture, and they have a certain perspective of who's in control. And even though there is a belief that they seek input, and systems do seek input, but we really believe that because the lived experience of many people from many cultures is incredibly important, they're often not heard, and not heard in a way that will help systems make changes that make a difference to communities. And I don't want to be negative, but I think a lot of the systems changes are really for their purposes only. We know that.
I think we always talk about things like authentic engagement. So what is the purpose of your engagement with those communities? Is it to just have a face at a table, or is it because you are actually listening to those needs or those lived experiences? And if you are, then how is that community member then going to be able to see the change and also be involved with that change? So we always talk about this specifically in research too, where we don't want to just come in and ask somebody to share their story and then we take ownership of that story. It's still their story. So they should have a role in from beginning to end. So if we're using, you know, a focus group and we're talking to a community member and we're asking them to share their lived experience, they should have a say in then where their story goes. And if it's to create a policy, well, then they're on that journey with us till the very end, and then even more so. And then we give it back to them and we say, you know, we've created, you know, a program, or we've created a space for you. It's yours, and you take it and you work with your community members because you know what to do with that. And I think some levels of government don't, like, that's a hard concept. I think they think, you know, it only is owned by government, or it's only owned by this organization, but it doesn't need to be that way. You can collaborate, and community can have ownership, and they can make it exactly what it is that they need, and that is okay. So I think for us right now, it's really trying to get that mindset changed about it is okay to change things up. It's okay to be more engaged and to have other people involved and around the table and have them authentically have a say in what's going on.
But we know from research in other countries in the world, and we've been looking at other countries in terms of their experience, it's not to say that people who work in these systems are bad people. We're not saying any of that at all. And we're not saying they're not trying to do something better. The belief is, and the experience of research shows, they may not have the capacity. They also may not have the systems and the culture that will support that. And coming out of government, and I used to be the director of immigration for many years, I saw that and I understood that, and that was our culture and that was our context. So the idea and the way to understand that is that it's not about seeking input, it's about how do we work with each other and talk to each other and understand different perspectives and not be frightened or threatened by different perspectives, and learn how to listen in very different ways. Both sides, all sides have to listen very differently. But that's the challenge we have, and that's the work we do, is bringing those voices together in multiple ways through our panels and so on. And we do engagement. That's our work. We do engagement. And by doing that, we've learned that it's a very hard task because, first of all, we're looking at changes in government based on, obviously, different populations, an aging population. So there's a new population, new culture, hopefully being formed that we may have some impact. And what you're doing is basically trying to bring people together in a way that they're starting to listen to each other. But we also believe, and one of the things we're going to be doing this year is focusing on how do we bring those people as officials into a process to see how they can actually learn to understand the process and the context differently. That's what Sweden's been doing relatively well in some locations, and we've been working with them for the last couple of years about some of those ideas, and we're bringing that into a conversation pretty soon and bringing a panel discussion on that topic between Canada, the States, Sweden, and Brazil, because they're actually going through the same processes. Somewhat more difficult in some ways, but definitely that's an interest to us, because we really believe all the things that you're doing, all the things that we're doing, other communities and other groups are actually trying to inform systems about changes. There is a sense that they may not necessarily, they have capacity, but they're not necessarily there to hear it in our way.
We are running out of time. So if you have something to add at the end, so feel free.
I have a couple things.
Go ahead.
Just very quickly.
Yes.
There are 5 themes that we think are really important for us to talk about over the next year, which relates to why cultural communities are important to the Canadian context of fabric. One is we need to talk about identity and diversity. We really need to understand that, because that's Canada. A lot of the diversity, but it's about also what are the identities that we have to understand that come from cultural communities and people within different communities. Number one, of course, is going to be immigration and integration. That's always going to be important, especially 400,000 more people, 1/4 of Canada's population is immigrants. We've got to face the fact that immigration is the lifeblood of Canada. It makes Canada for what it is known around the world. And that's really important for us to talk about. Employment and economics, really critical, because we're relying heavily more on immigration to make it happen for Canada economically, so we're stable and we're able to grow. If not, we have a real problem. Politics and governance, very much about how do cultural communities become involved in the process of politics and governance. What roles do they play to actually strengthen our democracy, its practices, and obviously its policies, really important. The last one is health and well-being. And we're focusing a lot of attention on community well-being, but also about the health of individuals, their communities going forward. So those 5 topic areas you will see in our work over the next year, one way or the other, and in collaboration with the Council and other partners as well. Really important. So thanks for this.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Kathleen, for taking the time to sit down with us today. And thank you for the work you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, our audience, for joining us today. We hope you enjoy it. If you like the episode, please like, share, and subscribe to see our upcoming episodes.